So this is a 1979 model and it's got the original motor in it. It has been rebuilt once before and it was upgraded to a 3.1 litre using 97mm turbo barrels and some aftermarket pistons, which are the Max Moritz wedge style domes. I figured today was the day. I won't put it off any longer. I'm going to start doing the removal of the engine, and the plan is to convert this to EFI and to add a turbocharger at the same time. I've got it jacked up. I'm just draining all the oil at the moment, and then I'll get this car up on some stands and I'll get the engine pulled. Whew, and there we go. 20 minutes later and the engine and transmission is out of the car. The 3 litre out of my car is now sitting on the engine stand and ready for the next stage, which is to remove the CIS. Quickly go through my list of parts here, which I'm going to be using to do my turbo conversion. So I've already started doing the wiring harness. As you can see, I'm using the ecumaster EMU Black. Hopefully you can see that in the photo. It's a nice little chunky little unit. So that's done. I've done the first half of the wiring harness, which is all the wires from the ECU, which are going to go to the connector on the engine. I haven't put the final connector in yet because I still need to do some final fitment in place. And there's my busman relay, which I'm using to provide power to all the sensors and equipment on the engine. So the first thing that sticks out is the exhaust. This is basically a stock 3 litre SC heat exchanger system. And the reason I'm using this is because I wanted to retain heat. So what I've done is I've had the original heat exchangers ceramic coated. I've ended up sourcing this J pipe. So this is an original 930 J pipe, which I sourced from a fellow in the United States. The turbo itself, I haven't gone and spent gazillions of dollars on a turbo. This is a Garrett copy. It's made by a company called Pulsar, and I'm sure plenty of people have heard of Pulsar turbos. They seem to be well made. I know nothing about them. This is a 3076. So the idea was I'm going to be running a low boost setup. The engine has not been rebuilt by me. So this is going to be my oil feed line, which I bought this from TurboCraft, from Chris Carroll and the guys at TurboCraft in the US. So this is going to fit on the top of the engine where the idiot light normally fits. That's going to take its place. A one-way valve in there, a ball and a spring, and then the idiot light sensor is going to screw into the top of that. And then this is going to drape over the top of the engine, and that's going to feed the turbo. The drain for the turbo, well, at first I thought I was going to use this. So I also bought this from TurboCraft. So that's the oil accumulator or reservoir or drain, I'm not sure what you call it. And that would normally feed to a pump, which would then suck and then return it back somewhere to the top of the engine somewhere. Now, because I'm using a ball bearing turbo, the amount of oil that's going to go through it is apparently a lot less, and they tell me that I can probably run gravity feed to the sump fairly successfully. So that's what I'm going to do first. So this isn't going to be utilised to start with. I am going to use this sump plate. So this is a plate that was made by another fellow on Pelican Parts. So that's designed to fit on the bottom. It'll clear a 3.2 oil pump with the screen, and it will have a drain plug on one side, and it has a fitting, a thread on the other side where you can fit an AN fitting to run the drain line. So that's what I'm going to use there. Another part I bought from TurboCraft, a bracket which is meant to mount or secure the turbo to the bracket, or the engine carrier bracket at the back of the engine. For the trigger, I've decided to use this. So this is from a company called Adapt Motorsport, and they sell this little crank trigger. So it's a combined unit with 2 Hall effect sensors. This will plug into the distributor mounting point on the engine. I've bought a new drive gear, which will go in here with a pin. This will actually read the trigger wheel off the back of this pulley. So that's going to give me my flywheel rotation. That's a 60-2 gear. So that's going to mount there. And then inside, where which runs off here, is another Hall effect sensor, and that's going to give me my camshaft position. But while we're here, we'll still talk about mufflers. I've bought this, I picked it up secondhand. This is a turbo muffler, which I may or may not use because it weighs an absolute ton. And I also picked up one of these Fab Speed ZORK pipes, or ZORK tubes, I think they call them. This is going to need adaptation or cutting off and welding on a 3-inch V-band. to mount to the turbo. So I'm going to be using the 3.2 Carrera intake system, and I plan to use the stock fuel rails and the stock throttle body. There's a company here, EFI Hardware, and you can see that, efihardware.com. So they sell a little adapter plate, which is meant to allow you to mount a throttle position sensor to the side of the throttle body. So that'll get rid of this wide open switch, so all of that stuff will come off. So that's for the throttle position. The injectors that I'm planning to use are these Bosch injectors, which I've bought from Rama at RHD Engineering in Australia. So these are 443cc injectors. I'm fairly certain that for the modest power I'm expecting to make, these will be more than satisfactory. The fuel pressure will be regulated by this unit. So this is again from Adapt Motorsport, and I've bought this one because I'm using the original 3.2 fuel system. This fuel pressure regulator will mount in the back, and I'll be able to adjust the fuel pressure without having to mount it somewhere else in the engine bay. I have got myself a fuel pressure sensor, and that'll mount in the side there. Hopefully, I mean, I haven't really mocked everything up, but I'm hoping there's room on the back of where this mounts for that fuel pressure sensor to stick out. Air intake temperature sensor, of course. Knock sensor. So I'm going to run a single knock sensor, and the plan at this stage is to mount the knock sensor on the base of the throttle plate, which mounts to the top of the engine, which seems to be a fairly common place to mount them. Coils. So I'm using these Bosch coils. You can see the part number there, but I've used these before on a couple of EFI conversions, and so far they seem to work well, so I'm going to use them. A map sensor. Now, I know that the Emu Black has an onboard map sensor, and I believe it's a 4-bar map sensor. The reason I'm using an external sensor is I just didn't feel comfortable running a hose from the ECU inside the car underneath the seat all the way through the firewall and into the engine bay, just in case something got kinked or if there was ever a leak or damage and whatnot. I just figured it was a lot safer for me to run a sensor in the engine bay. So I'm going to run this Bosch sensor. It's only a 3-bar sensor, but again, I'm only planning to run at this stage half a bar of boost. So I'm fairly certain this will accommodate my needs perfectly. Again, going back to the intake, to make the Carrera intakes work with my head, so these have a 42mm opening on the bottom, and the heads that I'm using are what we call the big port heads, which have a 39mm intake. So what I've ended up buying are these intake adapters, and again, these are made, well, I'm not sure who makes them, but I bought them from TurboCraft in the US, and you can see they're made out of two, they look like about 7 or 8mm thick laminates, which are glued together, and they're machined. So these are designed to adapt these intakes to a 930 head. Is because my heads are much bigger ports here, I'm going to use the gasket to trace where it mates to my head here, and then also make sure that this one mates to the top here. I'm just going to Dremel these out and blend them so that I have a nice straight shot from the Carrera intake to my heads. This is a BOOST Solenoid, and again, I've never used anything like this before, but it's a 3-port Mac valve, I think they call it, and the idea is I'm going to use this to help control boost. I'm just test fitting the wiring harness in the engine bay and running it through to the front of the car, because I need to get that finalised, and once that part's done, then I can start focusing on doing the harness on the side of the engine. And I'm just going to try and talk myself through this as well as you. Just makes it easier. I mean, if I talk you through it, then I guess it helps reinforce in my mind what's going on. This is my relay and fuse block, which is going to be mounted where the old CDI used to mount. It's actually quite convenient because this box comes with a couple of stainless steel mounts. One of them goes into the top mount where the CDI was mounted, and the bottom one actually goes into a bolt, which is a ground strap for that assembly. So that's where these relays are going to be grounded on to make the circuit. And from here, I'm running this is the power wire. I haven't sheathed it yet, but this is going to be sheathed, and that's running all the way across the back of the engine bay and then down around the right-hand shock tower, and it will meet down here with the starter motor. So that's where all the power for the relays and the sensors and everything on the engine is going to come from. The harness for the car I've got mounted here. So you can just, I haven't terminated it yet with the bulkhead connector. I'll show you what's happening with that in a minute, but I've just routed that through. And you can see, I again haven't fastened it yet, haven't done the final sheathing, but I wanted to test fit it. That's going to run through here and be tied alongside that air conditioning hose above the sway bar mount and through the firewall. And I've got a hole in my car because I've had a 3.2 engine in here before, and that's where the harness would normally mount through for the harness for a 3.2. So that's a handy little location there. That's where I've drilled it, and then there'll be a grommet, and I'll tape up the grommet so no water can ingress. Also, all the grounds for the ECU harness, I'm not sure if you can see that, they branch off from here, and I'm running them around the back through this braided cable. And that's going to run again down through the side here, and I haven't terminated it yet because I didn't know the exact length, but that's going to ground out onto the grounding strap, which is where the transmission and engine mounts, they ground on the body as well. So that's going to be my main grounding point for the ECU power. So out of this I'm running this plug. This is a DTM connector, and this is going to supply 12 volts from each of these relays through to the engine harness, and one's going to supply 12 volts for the wideband sensor, the idle valve and the boost controller. The other one will be for the coils, and the other one will be for the injectors. And the idea is that if I want to, like, you know, when you're checking for your trigger to see if you're synced, I can pull the injector one out, so when I'm cranking I won't be putting any fuel in the engine while I'm just testing for spark. And also you can, you know, pull both of these out so that when you're doing your initial crank to build up oil pressure, you can pull these out with no fear of wasting spark or having shorts or whatnot. Out of the engine harness here, so all of these pins are ready to go into the bulkhead connector. That's pretty straightforward. And then I've got these 4 wires coming out. Whoa, don't know if you can hear that, but we're about to have a major thunderstorm, so I'm just going to try and do this quickly. So these 4 wires here, one is the trigger for the fuel pump. So this is a ground, this is the ECU, and it's going to ground out the pump relay. So I need to put another wire in the back which will and run it to the front of the car, and that'll power the pump. This one here is what is this one? Oh, that's the tacho wire. So this one's going to tap into I'm going to have to build an engine harness as well, for this 14-pin connector here. So I'm going to tap into the pin which normally supplies the signal to the tachometer. And then the other 2 are just the ECU 12 volts and also the switched ignition. These are going to tap into my main relay here. That shouldn't say main, that should say ECU. Because again, the way I'm going to run this is I'm going to have it so that all of my relays are turned on by taking 12 volts from here, except for the pump one. Yeah, they're all going to turn on from here. I'm going to wheel my test engine. This is an engine that I've sold, but I'm just going to wheel in the connector because I've got the bulkhead connector mounted on the side there. That's how I've chosen to do it. I just want to see how it fits. Okay, so I've just got this engine sitting in here. It's not 100% up to the full height. Well, let's get it up there a bit higher. So what I've done is I've just made up this little mounting bracket using some acrylic, and I don't know how well that's going to hold up in the engine bay heat. Hopefully it will. So the idea is that all of these pins will mount in here, and I'm going to run, I hope to run the harness, just tuck it in a little bit more to the side there. And yeah, so that's that part. And I'll have to have 3 more wires coming out of here which will end in another one of these connectors, and I may need to redo this and shorten these wires and sort of tuck them somewhere, but I'm just getting it all fairly close to how it needs to be able to bolt this to the side of the intakes, and then I can do all my wiring to all my sensors and wow. It's really hard to compete with that. Yeah, so I should be able to do my wiring and tuck it fairly neatly and have it out of the way, and so it'll all come through here and then out to wherever. So I guess I'll have a junction and bridge off, etc. So let's go inside the car and have a quick look. So this is just to show you where everything's coming through on the inside of the car. I'll just try and, there we go. And then I'm going to run under here. You can see my cables, and I'll obviously have the ECU plugged in, and I'll mount it underneath the seat somewhere nice and securely. So I need to fit a coolant sensor. This isn't a 3.2 Carrera, but if it was, you would be seeing a sensor that they actually drilled and tapped all in there, and they would mount one of these little sensors. And that's what the ECUs and the 3.2s and 964s would use to monitor engine temperature. And the reason why that's a good source is because it's straight into the engine, so it's reading the heat directly. We're not waiting for oil to warm up. But this is the kit that Turbocraft provides. So it's a billet block. Inside that billet block, you put some automatic transmission fluid to help conduct the heat a little bit better to the sensor. The idea is that that billet block mounts to this plate, is designed to wedge in cylinder number 3, so on the first gap, where there's actually, like here it's all solid, but here's the first gap, and it's designed to go in between the head studs, and we're relying on the heat to conduct from the fins and through this aluminium strip to the block where the sensor's mounted. The idea is that once you mount this in here, you have to cut a corresponding slot in the engine tin that bolts on there. So in order to figure out where to cut the slots, what I've done is I've marked, you can see a couple of little black marks there, I've just marked out on the fins where this is going to sit. So using my calipers and a ruler and a felt tip pen, I've basically just transcribed the location of that plate to my engine tin there. And I've cut the slot for the plate, but yeah, I thought that the tin pushing back on the plate would keep it secure, but it doesn't. It's quite rattly, and I can't see that being correct. Close, but not quite. The other alternative is what Cluet does, and on his website he shows, well, somewhere on his website, they actually drill and tap the sensor directly into the camshaft tower. Okay, so you do it on the right hand side. You definitely do it on this side here, because there's clearance there to mount the sensor. And if you're wondering what happens if you drill a hole, well, here's a spare camshaft tower. So it would be on, I'll just turn it over, it would be on the right hand side, so the oil drain tubes are at the bottom. It would be up here, so you drill and tap into this cavity. So it's about 3 or 4 millimeters thick. Okay, there's the update. I decided to go for mounting the sensor in the side of the camshaft tower. So there it is, it's threaded in. I've just got to get a thick spacer washer there and just clamp it down. The only trick that you have to make sure is that you allow for enough room for the engine tin that goes over here. You're just going to make sure that you leave yourself enough room and that you clear the oil pressure line. And yeah, this one works out a lot better because this one's a little bit higher. There's a bit more clearance here. Okay, question about installing a knock sensor on my EFI conversion. I put myself a Bosch sensor, and I've seen a few threads where, yeah, people do mount them on the underside of the heads. They mount the knock bridge underneath, but I'm not going to do that on this one. I want to try the single knock sensor to see how it works. I know plenty of people do it, but my question is, does it need to be mounted underneath? Because if there's this thick aluminium spacer, as we know there is, then you have your shroud that goes on, then that goes on, and then this plate is bolted firmly and directly to the case on all hard aluminium points. And I'm not sure why we have these extra threaded holes here, but what's to stop you from mounting a knock sensor on the top here? Would this be just as effective as mounting it directly onto the case under here? Yeah, would love to know. Okay, so here is my chosen solution for a knock sensor. So as we know, there is a recess here, and so what I've done is I've had a friend made me up this aluminium standoff. So the bottom is the same diameter as the recess on the case, so that will go there. I'll put a little bit of heat shrink on here just to insulate the body of the sensor, I think. Maybe not, I don't know if it's necessary. So there's a bit of slop like that. So the knock sensor will go there, and then the top standoff will go on like that. And then the throttle plate will go on like that. And that's how I'm going to do it. Except I think this might be a couple of millimeters too tall. So I might just have to get him to shave that down a little bit. But apart from that, she's all good to go. And I've used some shielded cable because people are telling me that shielded cable is the way to go. And what I've done is I've taken the shield and I've soldered some ground wire to it, and I've attached it to the engine. So I'm choosing to shield it. I'm choosing to ground the shield at this end, so the other end, which will go into the ECU, won't be connected. Okay, so that's the shielded cable there, because I'm pretty sure you're meant to only ground these at one end. So hopefully that'll get rid of any potential noise if there is any. So I've chosen these Bosch coils, and I don't have any metal straps or retaining clips. I have used these on a couple of cars in the past, and they pose zero issues. They stick on the plugs fairly well. I don't think they're going to go anywhere, but anyway, it's not being twin plugs, so there's no plugs on the bottom, just on the top row. I've got my stock fuel rails. I've got some aftermarket injectors in there, some Bosch. I think these are 440cc injectors, which should be good for 300-ish, maybe 350 horsepower. And I'm using the fuel pressure regulator from Adapter Motorsport over on this side of the engine, and the damper will go on this side. So what I've done is I've mounted the multi-pin connector on a little plastic bracket that I've made and bolted it to the side of the intake. And this is normally where the three sensors are mounted for the, what is it, the pulley, the crank position, top dead center, and head temperature, or whatever it is. So I've run a power wire. Well, I've run a couple actually, but one for the injectors, we'll talk about the coils first. So a power wire for the coils, which goes around and branches off and goes to each of the individual coils, and of course it loops back and it comes down and goes to each of these coils here. So it's the little red wire there. That's what do they call that? Tefzel wire. It's really hard stuff, and my wire strippers don't like it because it's so slippery. The rest of the wiring, I've gone back to TXL wire, which I think is more than satisfactory for a backyarder like me. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the Tefzel stuff is really, like, that's the same gauge as this. These are all, I think, 18 gauge, maybe 20. Let me just double check. What did I buy? Oh no, they're 20. So these are 20 gauge, and that Tefzel wire is actually 18 gauge. And you can actually, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but visually that is narrower. And when you do strip it, when you look at the actual sheathing that comes off, it's paper thin, but it's really, really tough. So I've run I've got 6 trigger wires for the coils. Obviously they're all here, and I've put little heat shrink labels on them, injectors and ignition and whatnot. So there's one running to each individual coil, and then I've got the 2 ground wires. A little bit of controversy over these. The black one will be the power ground wire, and the white one, I believe, is what they call a signal ground. And some people say that that one should go back to the sensor ground on the ECU, and others say they should just be grounded on the engine. And I've got all my 8 grounds for this side here, and I'm going to put these onto a ring terminal, and I'm going to mount them to the engine, probably to the throttle plate, because there's lots of little studs here, or maybe to one of the studs that holds the fuel injector rail on, or whatever. But there's good grounding through the the inlet manifold to the heads to the engine. There is a good grounding point. In fact, that is the factory grounding point on a 3.2 Carrera engine. All the grounds go to that point there. There's about 7 or 8 wires that go there, so I believe that'll be fine. And of course I've got the ground wires on this side too, which probably should have made a little longer, but I'm going to probably again put them onto a terminal and mount them to this manifold here. So I've done the same for the injectors. I've got, you know, a power wire that comes through the back, runs around to each injector and it branches off, and then I've got the signal, the trigger wire for the injectors running back through to the plug as well. So I've got two, I guess what you would call sub harnesses. In terms of tools, nothing, well, a couple of tools I've been using. A little Dymo label maker's coming quite handy. A friend of mine loaned me his Delphi crimpers to do the open barrel splices for where I'm piggybacking the power leads to extend, branching them out, I should say. And I'm also using these crimpers here to do the terminals on the coils and the injectors. And a couple of times I've gotten stuck where I've put the pins in and then I've had to pull them out because I forgot to put heat shrink on. And this is the biggest issue for me, is remembering to put heat shrink on and where to put it before you put stuff on. And even though they say, you know, put your connectors on last, it still requires a lot more planning ahead, and I'm still not 100% sure what I'm doing, so I've made a few mistakes. But what I have found is, even though you can buy, you can go on eBay and you can buy these little de-pinning tools for connectors, I found they weren't that great. What I did find was a tiny little piece of, I don't know, it's not even 1 millimeter, maybe 0.5 millimeter diameter spring steel. So I bent that like that, and I can push that in, and it's perfect to de-pin my coils, pins from the coil plugs. So I've ended up using Raychem heat shrink. I haven't shrunk that part yet. The reason why I've chosen this is, well, I've never used it before, and I thought here's an opportunity. And I like it because when you shrink it, it's still nice and floppy. It doesn't go stiff, and it's supposed to last a long time, so that's good. The issue I'm about to have, and I don't quite know what to do, is when you have a branch like this, so I've got the wires that, you know, come across to this side and to that side, and they've got to go up to the plug. What are you supposed to do here? I mean, what I've done here is I've bent them back, and I'm going to put heat shrink over the top after I do this branch here. But I'm just wondering if that's the right way. Is that putting too much stress on the cables? Do wires like to be bent like that? Probably not. But I don't know what else you're supposed to do. I'm trying to avoid wrapping it with tape. If I do need to wrap it with tape, I will. And I do have some of this Tefzel tape, this little cloth tape, which is actually quite nice to use. It's not sticky on the outside. And I'm not happy with how I've routed these. Either one's over, one's under. It's just, every time you put something on here, you want to try and keep it clean and tidy, but it's got to go somewhere. And I probably haven't made these long enough because I can't, you know, tie them up to the injector rail and stuff, you know. So I'm still learning, still lots to learn. Okay, so we're back to the engine on the stand and talk about the wiring. I've almost done with the wiring, and I think I understand it. Well, you know, famous last words, we'll wait and see till I plug it in. But for some of you that were a little bit concerned and made comments or sent me messages about how tidy or lack of tidy everything was, it's not too bad. So I've just put one cable tie up there just to give you an idea of how it'll be at the back of the engine. And so everything's coming out of my multi-connector here. I haven't done the final heat shrink. I've inserted all the pins and double checked, triple checked. I've checked for continuity on the pin to every single plug on the harness to make sure that I've got a signal here and a ground there. All the grounds are joined, all the grounds for the injectors go to the ECU, of course. All the powers are joined, etc., etc. Everything is lined up 100%. I'm going to go on a limb and say 100% guaranteed. The only things I've got left to do, I'm going to have to extend my earth here or just ground it there, that's for the coils. I'm still waiting on the fuel pressure sensor, so I haven't terminated this one because it's going to come out of there. And this is my intake air temperature sensor. Now, I haven't done anything with that yet. I guess I can go ahead and put a plug on there because eventually this is going to be mounted in the back of some sort of a tube that's going to be sitting out here, I guess, because the elbow is missing. That's gone to get some plugs made for the elbow. But there'll be an aluminium tube coming in here, I think, and then there'll be a temperature sensor on the back of that, and that's where it'll take its air temperature from. Map sensor is just waiting for one of those rubber isolation mounts, which will just sit there, and I'll just mount my map sensor there for the time being. A couple of the questions I had for people before, I was talking about where do I get my vacuum signals from, and it seems to be unanimous that yes, map sensor is obviously after the butterfly because it wants to sense how much vacuum it's running. The other port will be used, as I said, to run my fuel pressure sensor and the fuel damper, which is still in existence over here. That one's going to be plugged up. I have no need for that one. And for the boost control solenoid, that's going to be mounted. Now, they say that you should take that from somewhere between the turbo and the throttle body. There isn't actually a mount. Actually, I'll show you the turbo here. I guess you want to see the turbo. So this is the Pulsar turbo. All nice and pretty and spinny and stuff. It's got this little port here, which apparently is a port for a speed sensor, which I don't think I have a use for. But there is no nipple. I know some of them already have a nipple on the side for an air line, vacuum line, but this one doesn't have that. So my options are to either add a bleed nipple to the housing, which I don't think I'm going to do. I think what I'm going to do is, after I've had the pipe made that goes to the intake, preferably via an intercooler, I think I'm going to try and take a vacuum port, or a pressure port I should say, probably from the same part of the pipe where the intake air temperature is going to be mounted. I've got my wideband lines here, and I'm not 100% sure what I should do. Should I just crimp them and make it a solid lead, or should I put a 6-pin plug here and for whatever reason make it unpluggable or detachable? Is there any need to make it a detachable point? The wideband, the flying lead supplied, is actually quite long, and it will reach, I don't know if you can really see that, like if I just put the plug somewhere around here, which is roughly where it's going to go, I mean that's going to mate up quite nicely. So I'm guessing, yeah. And again, what's the correct way? I mean, when you start, if you start using open barrel crimps to join wires, should you stagger them? Does anyone really care? I got no idea. So I don't know the etiquette or the correct way of doing things, but if anyone knows, please chime in. Because I'm not doing, this is a conversion to turbo, this isn't a purely built engine for a turbo. I haven't gone to the expense of equal length headers, etc, etc. These are actually the stock original heat exchangers for a 3-litre SC motor. So that's what I've done. So these are just the normal thin flange ones. What I have done ahead of before any of this, I did go and get them ceramic coated, because I knew that I was going to be doing this eventually. So I got this done last year sometime, because I wanted to make sure it lasted as long as it possibly could. I wasn't really thinking about suppressing or containing heat. I wasn't really thinking about that. I wanted to make sure that what was inside was completely clean, so there'd be nothing to blow through to the turbo. This is a J pipe from a 930. So I ordered this from a fellow in the United States because I couldn't find one anywhere here locally, and well, not for what I would call reasonable money anyway. So again, I had that ceramic coated, had the connector pipe or the crossover pipe ceramic coated as well. And as you can see, I've had a custom made, well, I didn't have it made, sorry. There's a guy in the United States, one of the forum users on Pelican Parts. He's ran a batch of these, not cheap, but this should in theory do the job. So I am still planning to run gravity feed for the oil drain from the turbo. I mean, yes, I probably should have just gone with an oil pump from the get-go, but again, I guess I'm learning. I wanted to learn and see for myself, and by no means am I saying that I am an expert, because I'm definitely not. Building an engine, I can do that, and I'm happy to sort of say, yeah, I'm pretty good at that. As for doing a conversion, this is the first time I played with a turbo at all. But from what I understand, the original 930s and their original turbos are what we call a journal bearing, so they're a plain bearing turbo, and they have a lot more oil going through them. and that's why they used to run a standard oil scavenge pump that would run off the camshaft on this side of the motor here, on the left-hand side of the motor, or if you're in the United States, the driver's side. So there used to be a pump that would mount off the end of the camshaft here, similar to how a power steering pump runs off the back of a 964 or a 993. With using a more modern turbo, which is a ball bearing turbo, they run a lot less oil, so I'm told, and that's actually the oil restrictor. So you can see that it's got a tiny, tiny orifice for oil to go through. I mean, obviously there's the other concern that, well, will there be enough with a lot less oil going through it? Will it be enough to keep the turbo cool and stop it from cooking itself? Well, I guess ultimately you'd be better off to use the water ports on the side here and run some coolant through, but we don't have coolant in our cars. And again, I'm sort of taking the lead from everyone that's sort of forged this path ahead over in the US, because they, you know, that's where everybody lives. Bigger market, of course. So I'm following their lead. Plenty of guys are doing it, and they're saying they're not having any problems. So I'm going to suck it and see, and give it a go. But they're also saying that if you're using a ball bearing turbo like this, which uses a lot less oil, then the chances of you running into any issues by trying to use gravity feed is minimal. Well, people are saying they're not having issues. The plan is to use a 90 degree, I'm just going to tighten that, so just on finger tight. There will be a 90 degree fitting here, and then I'll use this -10 braided tube, and I'll make up a custom length oil line. But I probably need to flip the engine back over now that you've seen all this. I'm trying to figure out where to run the line, because you know, I think you want to have a straight shot. Someone did suggest, I can't remember where they said it, maybe on Facebook, they said you might be better off pivoting this 90 degrees, or maybe even pivoting it 45 degrees, so that this is pointing towards the turbo, and then the turbo has a straight shot. I don't know if that's going to make a difference, whether it goes there or whether it goes here, because that point there is still, that height's going to be the same height. I don't know, let me know what you think. I will say though that when you put the long block on a table, like a lift table like that, it's a lot more stable having this, because it doesn't rock, so it's quite handy. And on the other side, I mean, again, that's just got a plug and a cap on it for the time being. I'm just waiting for it to arrive. I've ordered a magnetic drain plug, and if anyone's interested, the thread is an M20 by 1.5mm thread. Okay, so this is the turbo mounted, and I think I've clocked it, if that's the right terminology. I've undone the bolts here and sort of rotated this so that the oil feed's pointing, oh, it's not tightened up yet, of course. That'll be pointing straight up and down, and then the drain will be coming out the bottom. That's the oil supply line from Turbocraft. So I guess that goes like that, and then that goes on there, and that's why it's so long, so that makes sense now. And my wideband plug's gonna have to come somewhere around here-ish. So a couple of things. One, there's a lot of weight on that turbo, as people with turbos know. And the old original 930s had a 4-bolt flange here, and they would have a bracket that would sort of go between the muffler flange and the turbo exhaust flange, and that bracket would then be like that, and then it would, I think, be bolted to the engine cradle, and that would be what supported the weight of the turbo, so it wasn't all just resting on this J-pipe, because the only thing supporting this J-pipe are these nuts and bolts here. And as I said, don't take too much notice, these are just mock-up ones, and that's not even tightened up yet. But even when it's not tight, like, it's still, I've got to be honest, it's pretty strong, but I don't think it's smart to have a big, I don't know how many kilos that thing weighs, but you wouldn't want to drop it on your foot. But it's not smart to have that bouncing up and down without a brace. So on the while I was buying parts from Turbocraft in the States, they were advertising these cool little brackets that say that, you know, they're better than the original, and I can't use the original ones anyway because I don't have a full bolt flange, and that, you know, you'll never break it. And I'll never break this one because it doesn't fit. Well, it doesn't fit my application. So the idea is that barrel there is meant to go here, on there, like that, and then that hole is meant to line up to that, and they give you this big long bolt that goes through the whole lot. But in my case, the angles are all wrong for whatever reason, and obviously I'd have to replace that stud and make that stud a good 10 or 15 millimeters longer than what's in there. But if you can see you can see what I'm dealing with. So yeah, I need to make something, and that's where I'm going to try and call on a favour from someone that knows how to weld, because yeah, you can. So that blue cap there, that's just covering it up, but there will be a and I've got it here, so I bought that. And again, another question for you all, like this is specifically an oil drain with a -10 fitting on it, and again it uses an O-ring, and I would have thought that that was going to be scalding hot. So am I meant to still put a gasket on there or not? The turbo came with a gasket, but yeah, I just like to know whether that's meant to just go straight onto the housing there. But you can see that once that's on there, that'll be sitting down, and then there'll be a 90-degree bend or some sort of a degree bend coming off, so it's going to exit somewhere around here. So that means it's going to be pointing straight at that, which is not handy. Actually, let me just try and mock it up. I've just screwed on the drain fitting, and then I've just lightly finger tightened on the this is just a 90-degree, because I thought maybe that's what I might need. Obviously that's not going to work to go for a straight shot, because it's going to point straight at the J-pipe. So I'd have to come out and kind of go around, and I assume I'm actually going to have to go to that side there, because you're not going to be able to bend the pipe. But I don't think there's enough of a fall. I mean, so if I get under here with my bit of aluminium tube, so if I'm just, okay, look, there's definitely a fall. If I just hold the bottom, the tube onto the bottom of that fitting, and then line it up with the bottom of that fitting, the 90-degree there, there's definitely a fall. Technically, sure, that's where the pipe comes out, but realistically, that's where the oil's coming out. So that means is that the way I should be looking at it? So realistically, it's not from the bottom of there to the bottom of that fitting. It's more like that. Is that the right way to look at it in terms of the flow of a liquid from an area above to an area below? Jeez, I should have stayed at uni a bit longer, shouldn't I? So there it is. A little bit different to what you've seen before. I now have a muffler bolted onto the turbo and a little bit of piping. I don't have an intercooler yet because I'm not quite sure what's going to fit or how to actually mount it. So where we left last time was I'd pretty much done all the wiring, and I had my laptop hooked up and I was testing all the sensors and everything was working great, and that's all good. What I've done now is I've gone the next step, which is to add a muffler. That's a Vibrant ultra quiet resonator, and it is a 3-inch in and out. That's where the O2 sensor's been mounted. I am not 100% sure how that's going to fit in the car, and I know for a fact that that's not meant to be mounted so vertically. It should be mounted as like 10 to 15 degrees from horizontal, which is what I asked for, and it's not quite what I got. But for the purposes of test running, I think this should be good enough. And then yeah, when it goes back into the car, I'll probably go and get a wideband bung added on the side there. In addition to mounting the turbo, one of the things I wanted to do was have a bracket made, which you can sort of see in there. I didn't do the welding on this, by the way. I cannot weld for garbage. I just cannot do it. But I did do some welding. What I did was I mounted this little clamp on a strap on the back, or a bracket or a brace, and then I welded up this 2-piece mild steel, which has been just painted with galvanized paint. So that little brace there, which sort of bolts to the original where the normal hanger bracket would bolt to on the engine carrier, and then I've just got one bolt here. So it is really, like, it's sturdy. It's not going anywhere. It won't vibrate. It won't move whatsoever. The engine tin at the back here is non-original to this car. It's one that I bought from, I don't know where I got it from, to be honest, but it had lots of cutouts, and it had been broken and whatnot, so I welded in a little piece here, and then I had some friends, I cut out a piece, but I had somebody else weld that plate in for me. And what I've done is, you can sort of see the angle here, well, I hope you can see, where I've, actually let me get a torch. I've sort of routed the tin up and away from the turbo itself, and the goal is to eventually put some heat shielding underneath the engine tin. I haven't really seen a 930 engine tin, so I wasn't sure how they made space for the oil line and the intake and whatnot. I suspect they might have used a fixed metal oil line here instead of this one. So what I've done is I've sort of cut out the tin, and to stop the line from flexing, I've just made a little spring steel clamp here, which sort of wraps around the hose line and then just bolts to the side of the engine fan. So that does stop this part from going in and out, and I think there's enough sort of support to stop it from touching the sides of the engine tin. I didn't cut this part of the tin all the way out though, like all the way through here, and I kind of wish that I had, because it means that in order to get the engine tin off, you have to take off the piping. So that's probably not that well thought out. The piping itself, the intake piping, this is an eBay kit, so it's a 3-inch aluminium eBay kit with some clamps and some silicon joiners and whatnot. So that's just a 45-degree bend there, with a 90-degree silicon joiner, an extension tube, another joiner, and then this is a 180 that came in the kit. And I had to pay someone, because I'm trying to aluminium weld, but it just keeps blowing holes everywhere. So I've had a sensor mount put in for the air intake sensor, and I've also had a port put in for the wastegate source. The funny thing is, with this tube, that even though this is 3-inch tube, to go into the stock 3.2 throttle body, the rubber here is actually a lot larger than 3 inches. It's more like 3¼ inches, same as the throttle body itself. And finding 3¼ inch tube is near impossible, so I had to find a way of enlarging this tube here to actually fit snugly, so that there'd be less chance of leaks. And what I found was that you can buy a expander tool. So this tool here is what I used, and as you can see, it's made up of lots of little segments, like pie pieces, and when you insert this in the tube and then you rotate it, see there's like a conical, it's flared on this side and flared on the other side, so it sort of pulls them in and then squeezes this out. So that's how I actually flared open the tube a little bit at the end to make it fit the 3¼ inch size. And of course I used a bandsaw to cut the pieces that I needed. So I had to roll a bead on the end of the tube there, and I found this little tool on eBay, which is pretty cool. You sort of just mount that in your vise, and then you can put your own beads on the tube. So it actually comes out pretty well. I'll show you another one that I did, and those are the beads that I was able to sort of roll into it, which I think looks pretty good. So yeah, that should hold. So I've also plumbed in my wastegate, and I'm using a 3-port Mac valve. Pretty sure I've got this plumbed correctly. Number 1 goes to a T-piece between the charge pipe and the side of the wastegate, and then port number 2 goes to the top of the wastegate. Port number 3 vents to atmosphere. So hopefully that's correct. As you can see, the engine is mounted on a test stand. I'll give you a quick run through, or try to anyway. So that's my trusty test stand. So when I rebuild engines, I usually mount them on this to give them a static run, to make sure that everything's working as per normal. I can check fuel mixtures and whatnot. But today it's a slightly different purpose, because we're wanting to see if my EFI system will work. And there's a few things we need to do before we can sort of just start it. The engine knows, or that the ECU knows what the engine's doing, is mainly due to this little unit down here. Now I'm hoping you can see that. That's taking place of the original distributor. It's a combination crankshaft angle sensor, which is this one here, and a cam position sensor, which is that one there. and it basically tells the engine when to fire the spark plugs. But as it is, it doesn't know anything. It has no idea what it's pointing to, so you have to go in and set up your triggers. And it's a little bit tricky because you need to be able to determine top dead center, and you can see I'm pointing to the 0 there. That's where the 0 is on my crank pulley. But we need to do a syncing process, and it's all in the software. Let me see if I can pull it up. But that's the ECU I'm using. It's the ecumaster EMU Black, or EMU Black. And here it is. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on, I'm going to do what I call simulating turning on the key. The key. So it just gives me a 2-second prime on the fuel pump. The tank was empty, so I've just put some fuel in there. That's why it was a little bit noisy just then. And it will now tell me that we are connected. It's a little bit of a funny, it's a bit of a funky kind of a system, the software for the ECU master gear. It's not like AEM or Link or Haltech, where it's all fairly predetermined. With the with the ECU master gear, you can have any tab you want up the top, and you can add any table you want, however you want it to be. And the problem is with someone like me that doesn't know what should be where, I'm sort of flying blind. So luckily I had a lot of help from Rama, who runs Racehead Engineering down in Sydney in Australia, and that's where I buy my ECU and all the sensors for the engine. He also does ITBs as well, so definitely check out Racehead Engineering. I'll put his link down in the details below of the video. I'm not going to try and teach you how to use the ECU master gear, because you have to sort of sit down and work through it. Because on most ECUs you just type in your firing order, which is 162435, which is what I've got here. But then when you have to then go through and choose your injector phasing, which is a bit weird. It's a little bit confusing. I'm not going to go through it here. I understand it if I sit down and look at it for 5 minutes, but if I'm doing it on the fly, I have to really, really think hard, and that's not going to be good for anyone. When you're first syncing up, what you've got to do is, because we're using EFI, is we're connecting a spark plug test lead from the coil to the plug, because my timing light won't read off a coil properly. And then what you've got to do is disconnect your fuel, so that you want to crank the engine with the timing light on to verify that your top dead center here correlates with what's on the ECU. And I've gone and done that, and I can try and show you a little bit about how that works. So what we've had to do is go into the trigger table, and then down to the primary trigger, which is the crank angle sensor, and we've got it, we're telling it it's got 6 cylinders. We've got the number of teeth minus, including the missing teeth, it's a 60 minus 2. I had to get Rama to help me understand this, but he set it at the first trigger tooth being number 16, and the trigger angle being, well, we started off at 60, I think, and then it was a matter of cranking it to see where it fell. So what I'll do now is I'll just whiz the camera over there. I've actually pulled out the relay for my injectors, so the injectors won't fire, and I've got a remote starter hooked up over here because I can't reach the button. But just through there, I don't know whether we'll see that. I'll see if I can put the camera right in there. Let me try this. So when I hit the starter button, we should see the light flash. Here we go. I'm holding the camera on top of the timing light, so hopefully you'll be able to see. So it takes a while for it to, you'll notice that it doesn't actually start firing for a couple of rotations until it actually gets a sync, and once it actually syncs, then it will actually start to fire the coils. So here we go again. So hopefully that will show up, and you'll be able to see that we've got it adjusted to being the 0 at top dead center. Actually, there's something I might have forgotten. Ignition angle lock. So I've just enabled the ignition angle lock at 0. I just want to go and double check that, because it didn't look like it was quite at 0 then, but let's see if it is now. It looks like it's at 0 to me. So So obviously you've got to make sure that you go and uncheck the angle lock, because if you don't, it means that your ignition table's not going to be following anything. In here where it says trigger angle, we've got 66 degrees. You can modify that, like go up or down a few degrees either way until you get to the 0 to be right at top dead center, or whatever you set that to, depending on your crankshaft pulley, but mine's got a 0 at the top, which is good. Alright, so I'm not going to talk about other settings because that's all really brain melting stuff. The big thing is now to give it a crank and see if it'll fire. Injector relay back in, hear it click because it's still powered up. So everything's on, injectors are in. I'm just going to give the engine a crank and hopefully we'll hear some nice turbo noises, maybe. Good start. Wonder why I didn't keep running. I feel like my idle valve isn't doing its job. Okay, so I think I need to do some more playing around, but because I am using an original 3.2 throttle body, they do still have the idle air bleed screw. So I just opened it up a turn and I'll show you the results. Just give me 1 sec, I'll just go and fire it up. Give it a little rev. It says I'm very, very rich. That seems a little happier there, but I think as it warms up it changes, so going to be some compromises to be made. But yeah, so I need to do a little bit more work into figuring out starting when it's cold, enrichments, etc, etc. But on the whole I'm pretty happy. So it runs, and I think the next stage is to probably think about getting it into the car.